Hello everyone, welcome back to MMBS111 Introductory Microbiology. This is our final mini lecture in Chapter 7. This is 7.4. We're going to be discussing anabolism and sort of the relationship between anabolism and catabolism. We have 5 learning objectives or outcomes for this mini lecture. The first is to differentiate between catabolism, anabolism, and metabolism. 2, define amphibolism. 3, define biosynthesis. 4, identify the macromolecules that can be synthesized by the cell. And finally, explain the requirements for binary fission. So, cells are very frugal. They manage their carbon compounds and energy very carefully. Catabolic pathways contain all of the molecular intermediates that can then be diverted and used in anabolic pathways. And many of the molecules that are found in the cell can serve a number of different purposes. And we call this amphibolism. It's the ability of a system to integrate catabolic and anabolic pathways to improve cell efficiency. So this is an example of these amphibolic pathways relating to glucose that we find in the cell. So if we start with glucose, glucose can be used a number of different ways in the cell. We can put glucose through glycolysis and then use those component parts to form carbohydrates. We can also use those component parts to build amino acids. We can take it further through the process and use those component parts to form fatty acids. We can also incorporate other molecules from each of those processes into the cellular respiration cycle by using things like pyruvic acid, acetyl coenzyme A, and other compounds to break down these molecules and also build them up. So anabolism, as we've talked about before, is building larger, more complex molecules from smaller molecules. There are 2 possible sources for monosaccharides, amino acids, fatty acids, nitrogen bases, and vitamins. The first way is that these compounds enter the cell from the outside as nutrients, so the organism consumes them. The other way is that they can be synthesized through a number of cellular pathways from their component parts. The degree to which an organism can synthesize its own building blocks is genetically determined and varies from organism group to organism group. So let's look first at carbohydrate biosynthesis. When we're talking about biosynthesis, we're talking about synthesizing or forming biological molecules. Glucose has a very crucial role in metabolism and energy utilization. It is components of cellulose that is used in the cell wall and storage. It is also an intermediary in glycolysis. Peptidoglycan, the compound of bacterial cell walls, is formed through glycolysis. It's also a component of DNA and RNA. Capsules and the glycocalyx are also structures that are formed from glucose. Our other biological molecules are proteins and nucleic acids. Okay, proteins account for a very large proportion of the component parts of a cell. They are the essential components of enzymes. They also are found throughout cell membranes, cell walls, and They form the appendages of cells. There are 20 amino acids that are needed in order to make these proteins. Some organisms lack the genetic blueprint to synthesize all 20 amino acids. So some organisms have to acquire these essential amino acids through their nutrition. So they're not able to make them themselves, but they must find them in the environment. Our nucleic acids are responsible for the hereditary continuity of cells. They also are responsible for the direction of protein synthesis. And then anabolism is also essential for the general assembly of the cell. So these component parts of bacteria are constantly being synthesized. Catabolism is taking place as long as the nutrients, those large complex molecules, are present and the cell is not dormant, so we don't have a cyst or an endospore. Cell division, or binary fission, if we're talking about microorganisms, takes place when, first, anabolism produces enough macromolecules to serve 2 cells. Second, DNA replication produces duplicate copies of the cell's genetic material. And finally, membrane and cell wall have increased in size. So these 3 things have to occur prior to binary fission and one cell being able to become 2 cells. And that is the end of mini lecture 7.4. Make sure you go through these questions and that you can answer them correctly. Also review the learning objectives and make sure that you can respond to those appropriately. Our critical thinking question for this mini lecture is describe the roles played by ATP and NAD in metabolism. So make sure that you go through metabolism again and that you understand the role of these 2 molecules. And that's the end of this mini lecture. I hope that this video was helpful.